is Beck and welcome to a spoiler-free and then a spoiler review for Ghost Story. This is the 13th Dresden Files book. All my other Dresden videos will be linked in a playlist down below, so please go and check those out. So to get into this book, it is a massive spoiler. Again, like Changes, if I tell you what the premise is, you are going to know a lot more than you should. So to keep it as vague as possible, in this one, Dresden kind of takes a little bit of a back seat and there's a bit of a perspective shift. So it's got a different tone to a lot of the other books in the series, and I like that unique pivot. So in this one, Dresden learns that 3 of the people close to him are in mortal danger, and of course he wants to do something about that because obviously who wouldn't, and knowing his character, he will go to the ends of the earth to make sure people are safe. So that is generally the premise for this one. Naturally, there are also many obstacles involved in Dresden trying to do the right thing for the people that he cares about, and so because of that, there are a bunch of recurring characters in here that have definitely been prevalent in previous books. So I again really liked that we get more of a focus on the people around Dresden too, and not just Dresden himself. It makes the series seem very full and fleshed out to me. I'd also like to note that during Changes, which is obviously the massive game changer for this series, hence the title, I noticed that after Changes there was mixed feelings about Ghost Story because people just didn't like the tangent that it went on. Not tangent, they didn't like the direction that it went. However, when I read this, even though I found at the beginning it felt a little bit tangential to me with a bunch of different things occurring that didn't seem to connect, obviously as I read through the book and because I'm a fan of Dresden's character, I actually liked the direction this took. And even though there was a trope in here that generally I really dislike, and I did a video about tropes I hate, generally this trope really grinds my gears and I am not a fan of it whatsoever. However, in this book, I think Jim Butcher really twisted it in a unique way, and so because of the way that Jim Butcher handled it, because everything was very well established, I'm being vague on purpose, I promise I'll talk about it later in the spoiler section, because of the way that Jim Butcher handled it, like I said, I think it very well balanced itself and it was very believable, and so because of that, I actually liked this book. Initially, I thought that I might not, and I'm really glad that I did. That said though, I did expect a little bit of quietness after what happened in Changes and how climactic that was. To compare the two, you can't really do that, although with other Dresden books in this series so far, everyone has a different tone and theme to it at the core anyway, so to compare them, I guess it's easier, but then Changes and then onwards, Changes kind of sets up your expectations to be way up in the sky, and so everything else that I read, I feel like is not going to ever match up to Changes. So naturally, this one following Changes, I expected it to be good, but I didn't expect it to be amazing. However, I actually gave this a 5 stars, and even though at some points I just wanted the narrative to get on with it, I could appreciate what was being built and I appreciated the characters interacting, and I really liked all of the world building that was going on as well. You got a bit of a taste at a different facet of the world building compared to what has been established previously, and because you hadn't really seen this piece of the world unveiled before, it was quite interesting to read and learn about, and I quite like one of the characters, Sir Stuart, that appears in here for that reason. It gave you a little bit more context as to what Dresden has not seen going on lately, and I quite enjoyed again that aspect of the book too. I have talked about stuff that I disliked in here, which is kind of the tangential nature, feeling a little bit frustrated about the fact that I just wanted it to get on with the story, because I feel like a lot of action scenes and culminations of those kind of got parked, and then we went into this one and there's a bit of a time skip and I expected it to pick up immediately and it didn't. So I was again a little bit antsy, but apart from that, I don't really have anything negative to say. As usual, I've adored the characters in here, especially with Molly, Murphy, Butters and Bob. I think they had awesome scenes in here, and again, I liked seeing them fleshed out a little bit more and seeing a little bit more detail and context behind their involvement in Dresden's life as well. I quite enjoyed that, and I liked seeing them interact with each other too. Mostly this book was heartbreaking and hilarious, and I think I can describe a lot of the later Dresden Files books like that. However, this had a really different aspect with Molly in it, and I really loved the direction that her story took. It was very fractured and detailed, and I could just really appreciate it. Obviously, I'm not going to spoil anything, but far out, I really love how Jim Butcher has developed people so far. I really had to think about this after I finished it because I wanted to give it a 4 stars and then a 4.5, and then after really thinking about it, I'm actually going to give it a 5 because even though it wasn't as climactic as Changes, I think it's still really built on a lot of foundations that are pre-existing, and it kind of unveiled new doors that we haven't really had a chance to go down yet. And because it was doing that and cementing things of a deeper nature in regards to the characters, how they link together, and the world building overall, and its involvement with Dresden as well, I think it set some really interesting things to light. So we got to learn about a few things in a different context to what we had experienced them before. And because of those things, even though I initially was frustrated with the beginning, that was just me not liking a particular trope. So as far as the book goes, I think this was very well threaded together, and so I had to give it a 5 stars. Like, I still had all of those emotional reactions. I was still very invested, and I didn't want to put this down. I wanted to continue reading and see how it ended. And if I'm rating a book, then that is really one of the main things that I take into account, because if I can't put the book down, then obviously I'm liking it, so it must be a 5 stars. Even though the tone was very, very different to what I'm used to, I quite enjoyed it regardless, so definitely a 5 stars from me. And also, I'm going to be going into the spoiler section now, so if you don't want to get spoiled on this book, probably pause this, come down and chat to me in the comments, but otherwise, welcome to the spoiler section. First and foremost, I was really curious about how this is going to continue after Harry's death in Changes, because my goodness, that was a very massive change, as the book obviously stipulated. But coming into this, I was looking forward to seeing exactly on the back of the previous book. I wanted to know exactly what happened immediately, but it opened in a very differentiated place. And when I realized that Harry was actually a ghost in kind of a limbo area, I was like, Harry's gonna have to solve his own murder, isn't he? And then as soon as I had that thought, a couple of pages later, Harry Dresden literally said those exact things in outrage, and I had to pause the audiobook because I was laughing, because I had the exact same reaction in the exact same tone, and I just thought it was pretty hilarious that Jim Butcher really nailed that in terms of how a reader was going to react. I think he was very aware of what he was doing, and I really enjoyed it. I also really enjoyed that we got to see Murphy's dad, and he said, "Don't mention me to Murphy," and then in conversation Murphy was like, "That sounds like something my dad would say," and Dresden was like, and then just they breezed past it, and it just, those two make me so emotional every single time. As I did mention before, I really like the tone of this. However, the trope I hated is the resurrection trope. So generally when this happens, I just tend to despise it because it backtracks on a lot of characterization and world building and just development. It seems to undermine exactly what the character has done overall this time in favor of bringing them back with a blank slate. However, I don't think that happened in here, and that is why I liked it done in this book in particular. Usually I hate this trope and I will just throw any book in the trash that does this, but Jim Butcher really, really nailed it. Dresden didn't lose his prior character development. In fact, it was actually re-established a lot more strongly than I expected, because as a ghost we got to see all the lore that goes with that, and so Dresden was re-experiencing his memories in a really deep and intense way. So that was reinforced for the reader, which I loved. Like I said before, I really loved Sir Stuart, and that old-timey battle at the start of the book was absolutely cataclysmic, and it just really set the tone for this, and Dresden really seemed like a fish out of water. He didn't have any power whatsoever, and I love that he was rendered as only having a back seat to everything and not having any knowledge whatsoever, whereas usually he has a lot of power in magic as well as in knowledge, and so he can draw on a lot of that. But Sir Stuart really took the mantle here, especially at the beginning, and I really liked him for that reason. I really like the ghost world and all of the new world building and lore associated with ghosts that we really haven't had a chance to really touch on before. We have tangentially with like little bits and pieces, but we haven't actually physically seen Dresden interacting with a lot of ghost stuff, so I really like that he got to do that, especially with Mort as well, and that is a character that we saw in Deadbeat, I think, and we got to see him revisited again, and both him and Dresden have grown in power, and I love the different ways that they've managed to manifest that. But anyway, let me get back to the trope that I was talking about. I like that he wasn't made into a blank slate, and that his determination and his personality wasn't rendered moot in the plot. He was actually more reinforced, and it especially nailed that at the end in his conversation with Mab, but I feel like if I talk about that now, I'm skipping very much ahead, so I'm just going to go back to my notes. Touching back on Sir Stuart again, I really like that at the end he signed over to Uriel, I can't remember how to pronounce it, the Angel of Death, I think his name is, the Archangel of Death. I like that Sir Stuart signed over to him because I really hope that means that we get to see Sir Stuart more. It seemed to hint that we might, but I really like that he actually went somewhere, because when he was in that summoning circle and he passed over his weapon to Dresden, obviously Dresden had to level up in this ghost form somehow, so Sir Stuart enabled that in the plot, and it felt very believable, so I didn't doubt it really. But when he came back at the end and he was way more himself, and then he signed over to Uriel. It gave me hope that we might see him again, and I really hope we do. But that leads me into Uriel, and at the end of my changes spoiler section, I said that I bet Uriel brings Dresden back, and he kind of had a hand in that, because we found out that Dresden's decision to join MAB was a whispered decision, not by Dresden's immediate choice. So Uriel gives choice, and so that's why he kind of brought Dresden back in this kind of limbo area, and obviously his body wasn't located after his death. And so that was one of the things that made me think, hang on, where is Dresden's body? Why aren't we aware of how he's coming back? Why is he a ghost for this entire book? Why is it only in the last section that he manages to come back to the actual real world after he's been saved by the island and by Mab? I was frustrated reading about him as a ghost, but in the end it turned out okay. So I'm glad that we go into the next book with a little bit more context and actual ability to interact with everybody, because I was surprised at the way that Jim Butcher managed to initiate interactions between all his characters, given that people often can't interact with ghosts. So I thought the different ways that he managed to manifest that were quite clever. Additionally, I want to talk more about Mort as well, and how him and Dresden have very much come into power in a tangential way, but Dresden has been way more impulsive with it, whereas Mort has been a lot more calculated. And I quite like that they're balanced opposites almost, where Dresden is impulsive and will jump into action, Mort will delay action and go about it in a very different manner, often just ignoring the problem until it goes away, which is not always a solution. He was absolutely infuriating to read about at the beginning, especially because he was constantly refusing Dresden, but something that just made me really happy and also broke my heart at the same time. Very odd things to feel at once. When Dresden was talking through Mort to Murphy, and Murphy was corroborating the fact that it was actually Dresden in spirit, and Murphy realized that Dresden actually had died, that just destroyed me. But I was like, it can't be real, it can't be happening, because I know that there are more books in the series, so he can't stay dead forever. So while it did upset me at the time, and I love that it made me emotional because that's the sign of a good book, I was like, there is light at the end of the tunnel, there is hope. And sure enough, there is. Something that I also enjoyed about this book is that Dresden doesn't have any particular knowledge that is specific to the spirit world, whereas Mort did. So while Dresden has built all of his knowledge and know-how around magic and the White Council, Mort has built all his knowledge and power about ghosts and the spiritual world. So I like that the rug got pulled out of Dresden in that sense, because we were learning things from Mort in the same way that Dresden was, so it gave the reader an opportunity to learn more, which I loved, because the way that Corpse Taker was reintroduced, I don't really like her character. I mean, you're not supposed to, but I'm not really entertained by her. I just find her a bit of a caricature of a villain, like she just wants power and a body to wreak havoc, and that's it. So when she came back after being in Deadbeat, I was like, oh, great. But she actually, hopefully she got destroyed in this book. And I like that she ended up eating the spirits. I was like, oh, that is fascinating but disgusting. I wish I could unread that. And I like that Dresden brought all of the spirits to her and he didn't realize what he was doing. And so Mort would have been like, mate, I was protecting all of those spirits, even though they were murderers and terrifying and gruesome and horrible. So again, I really like that world building, and I like that Dresden didn't have the knowledge, so he made situations worse for himself. And I also adore the end scenes with Molly in her own head. I love that Molly's magic and the way that Mort helped her at the end, it kind of circumvented Leah's advice when we saw Molly trying to defend herself and work for herself near the start or to the middle of the book. It kind of undermined Leah's advice of you need to stick up for yourself and be powerful enough to look after yourself, whereas Dresden has always had people to have his back and he's trusted other people to do that. So I like that at the end, when push came to shove, that Molly felt like she was on her own and she has been distancing herself from everybody, but in the end Mort actually came to help her and Butters was there to help her as well, and so she wasn't on her own after all. And I hope that becomes a revelation for her character, because it's absolutely heartbreaking that she is distancing herself from everybody because she wants to be like Dresden and obviously is not, and she has been very fractured by what happened in Changes and that psychological damage. I'm so excited to see what happens with her character, and I like that we got an inkling of what she might become in a previous book. I can't remember which one, maybe it was Deadbeat or earlier, when Dresden saw her with the sight and the different iterations of her to see what she might have as a potential future. I have a theory that she's not going to just be one of those things. I have a feeling that she is going to yo-yo between them or become one and then the other and then stay fixed as the good one. I'm not sure, but I really like the way that she's being developed, and I love how it's been foreshadowed as well. I just love that strength comes from magic and trust in others. That's basically the conclusion conclusion of what I was just talking about. Something else I loved, like one of the scenes in here, was when Dresden literally manifested himself with magic out of being a ghost and into a actual physical form. I thought that was amazing, but when he was like, oh, my mother's amulet isn't around my neck, I wonder why that is, I was like, this can't last. And then sure enough, he lived long enough to get shot in the head in front of Murphy and go back to being a ghost. Holy crap, that trauma. Murphy is really suffering. I really love their relationship. I hope things are discussed, because obviously with the 6 month time skip, there was a potential there before that happened. And she's obviously very emotional and very steadfast in walling everybody out. But Dresden knows who she is, knows what she's like, and knows how she reacts to things. So I hope that that gets addressed, and I hope that they can go forward and have a discussion in the future books. I feel like they do in Cold Days, because I feel like in the comments in my previous videos, people are like, look forward to Cold Days. So maybe I need to do that. I don't know, we'll wait and see. I was also terrified at the end that Butters actually would die this time. I know in Deadbeat he put a summoning circle around himself at the last minute and he's super, super clever, which was amazing. But in this one, when he actually got shanked, I was like, there is no hope. So I'm really happy that he got restored at the end of this. However, some things that frustrated me again in this book is the narrative around gay jokes. Every time they come up, they're just really not handled very well, even though they're supposed to come off lightly. I don't know, I just don't like it. And I wish that it was done a lot better. So that's all I really have to say on that. I just wish they were handled a little bit better, because it seems to touch and go every time there needs to be a moment of comedy. And I just wish that, again, they were more nuanced, or they just weren't there at all. I don't know. But that aside, Butters pretending to be a white council member was really cool. He's such a nerd when it comes to, D&D and stuff. I think it's great, and I love that that was played on. I think it was very clever and also very funny, but again, it was also terrifying because you knew that he could die in that situation. So I think at the beginning with those tangential aspects, I like that older characters that we recognized were involved, because if it didn't have that emotional charge to it of me already knowing who was involved, I wouldn't have cared as much. So I think that was a very clever way, or a very clever mechanism for Butcher to initiate, because it made me interested in those scenes earlier on, and that's what kept me reading and kept me interested for what happened at the end, which was very climactic. Additionally, I did mention a few characters that were touched on in here, and that includes Bob, and the fact that Evil Bob came back after Bob lopped off that evil part of himself back in Deadbeat. I didn't actually see that coming, and I quite enjoyed that, because that was a terrifying plot twist, and it has so much potential for damage because of how powerful Evil Bob is or seems to be. And I really hope Bob wasn't neutralized when he opened a passage for Dresden to get back into the fight, and he got left behind, I think, with Evil Bob to fight him. I really hope that Bob survived. Obviously, he probably would. I mean, I'm sure he would, because why wouldn't he? I'm really apprehensive, if you couldn't tell. Talking again about the time skip that happened at the beginning of this book, immediately I wasn't on board because I wanted it to be as climactic as Changes, but I think it was a smart move not to actually make it as climactic as Changes at the start, and to have that 6 month time skip, because you let characters simmer on Dresden's death, and it let characters develop in a way that means when Dresden comes back, we have to relearn who they are. And I really like that, because everyone seems just a fraction different, and things have shifted a little bit for Dresden too in terms of context and knowing everything, whereas before he had a lot of power in knowledge, and he doesn't have that as much anymore. And so I like, again, that tone shift, because it means ramifications and ripple effects for the future, because clearly Marcone is in charge of a lot, but we don't really get to know the true scope of that, and I feel like that's going to be touched on later. To be honest though, I still feel robbed about the moment with Murphy and Dresden at the end of Changes, because there was so much opportunity there, and it just, Dresden died. I'm still mad about it a little bit, just a little bit. I did like that some of Murphy's humor came through in this book though, when she was talking to Dresden. So they still have that spark there, they still have that trust there, but it has changed a lot in the 6 months that Dresden has been gone. And again, I really love that priority shift, and that Dresden is a little bit unbalanced compared to before, because it means that he's going to have to relearn a lot of stuff, and obviously the reader is going to relearn it with him. So I like that shift, and I'm really excited for things to come. Now I want to talk more about the ending. When it came to Dresden suspecting Kincaid at the beginning, I was like, of course Kincaid shot him, no one else can make that shot. So when it came out that Molly actually knew that Kincaid was going to kill Dresden and she had to cover it up. That was absolutely heartbreaking, and it was another level that he just shouldn't have gone to with his apprentice. So it really cements the fact that Dresden obviously isn't sane all the way, and he will put people down to get where he needs to be, and he got pushed to do that as well. So you don't know who else has been pushed, and you don't know what mechanisms are occurring with stakes that are also as high as when Dresden signed over with Mab. I don't know what is going to be built on there, but I love the conversation at the end of the book that Dresden had with Mab, and how he was basically like, my will is my own even though I work for you, and he pushed right back on her. And I love how he did that, because it gave you a little bit of hope and wiggle room as to where his character was going to go, and it was also a point for Mab to be like, I'm going to push you as hard as I can. So it makes me interested in why Mab actually specifically needs Dresden and wants him on her team, because I think there's a lot of stuff brewing that we don't know what is going to eventuate with, and that's what I'm excited for, because more big players are starting to be unveiled, and it seems to be going down the route of like an apocalyptic urban fantasy book, and I love that idea, especially when the big kickers are going to come out, and Dresden is naturally going to go toe to toe with them, because why wouldn't he? He's Dresden. One little thing that I didn't like was just like a plot thing, and it made sense when I got to the end, but Thomas really wasn't in this very much, and I thought that he might be, but it turns out that he kind of got a little send-off at the end with Justine as well, and it was kind of a little bit humorous, but it was also laced with heartbreak, trauma, and sadness as well, and I don't believe he's been sent off in the narrative whatsoever. He's definitely going to come back, but it made sense that he was kind of sidelined, because if he knew what Kincaid was going to do to Dresden, he would have stopped it. So I get it, but I'm annoyed at the same time, because now that Dresden has come back, does that mean that they're going to go back to miscommunication again? What's going to happen with Thomas? I really want to know, because I just want to know more about Thomas and his trauma, and I don't want it to happen off the page. And I feel like that send-off at the end of the book was kind of Jim Butcher going, okay, Justine is going to deal with it with a bit of help. That's it. So I want that to be explored more. Thomas is one of my favorite characters, because he's literally got a demon, and I don't know how that's going to eventuate later down the track. And I'm really interested, because obviously there is a link to how Leah made the vampire parts of Susan go to sleep in the previous book, so something is afoot there, and I want to know what that is. So in conclusion, I honestly have no idea what to expect going into Cold Days. However, because Dresden is the Winter Knight, I expect Fae shenanigans to go on, and I don't always love Fae stuff, but I think it's done in a way in here that I can kind of get on board with it, but they do seem quite overpowered. So now I hope that with Dresden being the Winter Knight, that he can fight that a little bit and combat that a little bit, but we'll see. Dresden has literally had all of his stuff destroyed, all of his life destroyed, his life taken away and then given back with choices, and now he's working for Mab. So everything has absolutely shifted. I suspect that with Dresden making the deal with Mab, he's going to be a bit of a wrecking ball for her, so I'm really interested at the different complicated weavings that's going to encapsulate, because he's going to have to try and wiggle his way out of these things, and I really do wonder if he's going to wiggle his way out of being the Winter Knight, but we'll find out, I'm sure. I really hope more Norse mythology is touched on in the future, and I really can't wait to discover what happens with Marcone, and then also Dresden and Murphy, because I love them both. But as I said before, this is a 5-star book for me. I did really like it. It's not on the same level as Changes, but I don't think anything else really will be, so it still does get a 5 stars from me, even though there were bits and pieces that I stumbled a little bit on, but that's okay. After Changes, I expected to read something and find it not perfect, because holy crap, Changes was a whole thing. So thank you so much for watching this video. Come chat to me down below in the comments. I would love to chat with you, but thank you again so much for watching, and I'll see you in my next video. Bye.